Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Dr. Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner, share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina.
Hello, Brian. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
When you hear welcome to the Widowhood, what's the ticker tape that runs across your mind just hearing a statement like that?
It's really weird. In my work, I've been running across a lot of widows lately. A lot of people who have lost their spouses, men and women, but mostly women. So it's different for me now than I would have said it was, a few months ago.
Okay.
It is, at the age that I am now, a lot of people, are losing their spouses. So it's
Mhm.
something that's it's become fairly common in my life.
Okay. And speaking of the work, I just want to say before we dive into this rich and meaningful conversation, I'd like to allow you to introduce yourself, to
Mhm.
share the work that you do, how you serve those navigating grief, and why your work is such an essential part of this conversation. And I really want to say, Brian, thank you so much for joining me and just taking these moments to share with our listeners and who you are and the heartfelt meaning behind your work.
Thank you. Well, what I do is I try to help people to navigate loss in life, particularly loss of a person. My story is my daughter, Shayna, passed away suddenly at age 15. And that was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, just about a month ago. It was June 24th, 2015. So my personal experience with loss made me to dive deep in to do this work for myself and to find things that worked for me, and I thought after a few years of doing that, after probably 4 or 5 years into my journey, like, maybe I could help somebody else. There were people that inspired me early in my journey that helped me to get to where I got to finally, and I want to be able to help people to get there. So I work a lot with parents who have lost children. I'm part of an organization called Helping Parents Heal. I'm on the board with Helping Parents Heal, and so we've been doing, that, working with parents for about probably 9 years or so, and then became a certified grief educator and certified life coach, as I said several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And my work's expanding now, working with people who have lost spouses, lost parents, lost pets. Grief is not just a matter of losing a person. It could be losing a job. It could be getting a divorce. There are lots of different things that can trigger grief events. So again, what I try to do is help people like, what do I do? How do I navigate this? You feel like your life is over. How do I start over? How do I continue my life? How do I honor my loved one? How do I honor the pain that I'm going through, but also maybe transform this in a certain way? So that's what I try to do is help people to get to that point.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing about Shayna. Do you mind if I ask a few questions?
No, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I do want to say we may share our story every day, and it may sound like rope to people, but I believe there's still a little bit of a price to pay when we share about them. We may have learned how to manage that grief,
Mhm.
but it's not just a carefree conversation that our emotions and who we are not connected to that. What would you say to that statement?
Yeah, absolutely true. It's interesting because I do a lot of podcasts. I have my own podcast, but I also do a lot of speaking events and stuff. And people might think, oh, well, 10 years, he's kind of over it. He's moved on. He's past it. That's not true. I believe that the grief always stays with us. It might change in form. It might affect us differently, but I will always miss my daughter. And, it's still the 10-year anniversary that came up, that those things, those anniversaries, birthdays, et cetera, they still hit hard. So, I appreciate you saying that this is not something like it's over and it's past and, we move on. I don't think we ever do that. I know that I won't. as long as I love my daughter, which I always will, as long as I'm in this body, I will miss her, and that's part of the grief.
Thank you for sharing that. And when you talk about try to help people or try to help them transform, I think you're pretty successful at it. So you say try, I'm kind of like, I think that would you really talk about people you have helped and how you've seen their lives transform through the years?
Sure, sure, and I say try because no one can do the work for you, and we talked earlier before we start recording, this is work. This is not I don't believe in the saying that time heals all wounds. Time gives us the opportunity to heal our wounds, but we have to do the work. We have to turn within. We've gotta do I have a technique that I work with people on. And so when I say try, I mean, I've been very the people that have been attracted to me have been people that have done the work. I've had a very high success rate. I've only had one person that I can think of that I turned away because I just knew she wasn't ready to do the work. So I can't, but I can't do the work for someone. And it's not an instantaneous thing. I'm kind of smiling because there's a woman that I met with once and we had a meeting, and then we would talk like a week or so later. She goes, "I'm feeling better. I'm feeling somewhat better." And I was like, "Well, good." She goes, "I'm not 100% better." And I said, "Well, no, I wouldn't expect you to be after one meeting. If I could do that, I could charge a lot more money and I'd be a very wealthy person. But it's not a matter of like, you do these 3 things, or you do these 4 things, and it's over. So it's more like a walking alongside someone. I'm a grief guide is what I call myself, and I was talking with the guy, and he kinda gave me this image. He goes, "You're kinda like a navigator." People come to me, and they tell me kinda where they wanna go, and I'm like the GPS system. It's like, "Okay, here's some ways that we can get there. Here's some things that we can do." But it's like the person I'm working with, you've got to be ready. You've got to have the right mindset. You've got to go do the work. It's like if you went to a trainer and you didn't go to the gym to work out, you just went to the trainer, you're not gonna get any gains. So it's similar to that.
Okay. I want to circle back to something about your podcast. Tell us about the name of your podcast, what's discussed, and where we can find it.
Yeah, my podcast is called Grief to Growth, and everything in my branding is grief, and it's the numeral 2, growth, and it's on all the podcast platforms. And it's really pretty far ranging. I have a lot of people who are what I call overcomers, people that have gone through difficult times, whether it be medical issues or losing a person or multiple different things. Because again, I think those are people that can inspire us to know that we can move forward. I believe in I hesitate to use the word spiritual approach because people then think religion or they think woo woo. And my approach is neither one of those things. I'm a very pragmatic person. I'm an engineer by training, so I don't ask anybody to believe anything. I just give people evidence for what it is, the conclusions that I've come to. So I do have people on that talk about things like quantum physics, mediumship, afterlife communications, near death experiences. I have a lot of near death experiences on because if we're thinking about our loved ones and where they are, I know for me, I wanna know what did she experience? Where did she go? Where is she now? What better way to find out than by talking to people who have been there? So I've interviewed, at this point, probably a couple hundred people who've had near-death experiences. So it's things like that, mental health professionals, grief experts. So I have people on and we had conversations kinda like you and I are having now to try to because I feel like everybody's got something to teach us, and we can learn either through our own experience or through others' experiences, and I wanna learn as much as I can through other people's experiences. So I love sitting down and having these conversations with people who've been through it, people who have, like one of the things that I talk to people a lot of times about is forgiveness, and people will say, "Well, forgiveness, and we don't really understand what it is, and we say it's hard, and we wanna hold on to it." So, I'm like, if I can interview someone who was, say, sexually assaulted by their grandfather and they've forgiven them, or someone whose father murdered their mother and they've forgiven their father, I'm like, if those people can do it, then certainly I can forgive the things that's happened to me. So I like to talk to people like that as well.
What is the power of forgiveness that makes it so intriguing to you?
Well, the thing about forgiveness, again, I think a lot of people misunderstand it. They think forgiveness is excusing what the person did to them or accepting what the person did to them. And neither one of those things is necessarily true. Forgiveness, as I've heard, I think it was Oprah Winfrey that said, is forgiveness is giving all giving up all hope for a better past. It's really just accepting the situation, and it's releasing yourself from that person. When you hold anger to someone, you're actually energetically tying yourself to that person. It's like you've taken yourself, captive. And holding anger is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. You know, Typically our anger doesn't really impact the other person. They might be going on living their lives, but they're living rent free in our head every day. So forgiveness is a release of ourself, a release of ourself from that situation. And a lot of times when I'm working with people, speaking of forgiveness, the number one person they need to forgive is themselves. So a lot of times we'll hold anger, we'll hold guilt over what we did or didn't do, for our loved one, and that can prevent our moving forward in our healing process. So forgiveness is just if you've got unresolved anger towards yourself or towards others, if you've got guilt and if you have shame, those are three things that can really hold us back from allowing this grief to do the work that we need to do with it.
I can see that, and I think most people may have not considered the value of forgiveness in their grief journey, just hyper focus on this person is no longer here instead of some of the secondary impacts of their absence. You talk about doing the work. What does that mean? What would that look like when someone says, "Well, what's the work I have to do?" And second part, if I can add, how do you know someone's not ready to work with you?
Well, I've been very fortunate. The people who have been attracted to me so far have been people who are ready to do the work. And I have a complimentary session where I bring them in and we talk. And it's like it has to be mutually, agreed on that we can, I can help them. And that the person I'm thinking of that I couldn't help, she wasn't ready to listen. She wasn't listening to anything I was saying. She was just basically blurting her story out, over and over again. A lot of anger at the person, at the medical situation. I thought the person was wrongly that passed by wrongful means in
Okay.
the hospital, accusing the doctors of murdering their loved one. Just a general just wanted to tell the story over and over again, and not really willing or able to let go of any of that. And so that was the one person I could think of where I just felt like I couldn't really help them. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a trained, psychotherapist. So if someone has, medical issues, now I do work with people that are in therapy. So I have clients who are in therapy and they're also working with me. So I will refer them, out to a therapist if they've got, that type of a thing. But it's mostly a matter of being willing. It's a matter of being willing to do the work, to let go, and it doesn't mean you have to come in and say, I'm gonna let go of all the anger. I'm gonna let go of all the guilt. As I said, this is a process, but just being willing to take that step, being willing to see that possibility. Because you can choose to take your grief and hold on to it and the anger and the pain for the rest of your life. And I've seen people who've made that choice, and I can't take that away from them.
And that is very true. But I will say for me, it's hard to watch someone choose that because you know for certain there are options.
Yeah.
When you talk about work, does that intertwine the GEMS method as far as what that work would look like? And if so, if you could expound on that.
Yeah. So as I said, for me, 4 or 5 years into this, I realized there's certain things that I was doing that seemed to be helpful, and I tried everything. So I'm reading all these books and trying different things, and I'm like, I need to have a daily practice, and I wanted to make it simple for me and for other people. And after a while, I realized I had this 4 letter acronym, GEMS, GEMS, that I recommend to people. The first one being gratitude, and it's kind of gratitude. I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, "This is bogus. I don't see how this is gonna help. What do I have to be grateful for, and what difference is that gonna make, in my life?" It's like 'cause I'm not a huge thing, like, we can manifest anything we want, so some people say we can use gratitude to manifest, but having said that, we can set conditions and we can set intentions, and it starts with gratitude. And what I've realized, again, after studying this for a long time, is that we are wired to focus on what's wrong. Our brains have evolved to find danger, to focus on what's wrong so we can fix it. And our brains are evolved to keep us alive. That's a great thing. But they're not necessarily evolved to make us happy. So when we talk to people, a lot of times, how are you doing? The first thing we want to go to, but after we say fine, is we move to all the things that are wrong. My car won't start, or my house isn't big enough, or I'm working too hard, or whatever it might be. So with gratitude, it's like, what if we started focusing on the things that are going right? And everybody, all the time, there's something going right. If you think about just like right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I have food. I'm cool. It's hot outside. In the winter, when I have heat, I'm grateful for that. The little things we take for granted a lot of times, it's the gratitude practice helps us to focus on that, which gives us a more balanced perspective on life. The other things, our brains are neuroplastic. We can develop pathways in our brain, and by thinking about things that are going right, we actually train our brain to focus on things that are going right, which actually changes our brain chemistry. So gratitude is the foundation. That's really important. Exercise is the second thing. We are mind, body, and spirit, and we have to move our bodies. Our bodies are designed to move. For me, it happens to come in the form of walking. I walk 6 miles and first thing every morning. That's just my thing. But for people, I'm like, if you can walk, if it's dancing, if it's gardening, if it's yoga. I had a woman I interviewed on my podcast. She got into powerlifting. People recommended all these different things, and she said that doesn't work for me. Walking, no, yoga, don't like it. But she loves powerlifting, so that's her thing. So again, it's that brain chemistry thing. Our bodies need it. Walking gets me outside. Also, connection to nature is good for our bodies. Sunshine is good for us. So exercise is the second thing, and then some sort of mindfulness or meditation practice, which helps us to lock in the gratitude practice, by being mindful. So again, for me, what it looks like is twice a day, I will do like a 20-minute meditation, but it doesn't have to be that. People can do 5-minute meditations. You can do 30-second meditations as you sit at your desk or when you get ready to go into a meeting, but some sort of a practice that helps you to be mindful so that when your brain starts going down that path of like everything is wrong, first thing is catching it. Okay. This thought is not serving me. This thought is not helpful. And how do I switch to another thought? And that's a muscle that we can develop through the mindfulness practice. So that's the third leg of it. And then the fourth one actually kind of incorporates them all, which is self care. A lot of times when we're in grief, not a lot of times, we are like drained. It takes all of our energy, and we really have to practice self-care. We've got to set boundaries when it comes to other people. We've got to learn to say no, which is another aspect of setting boundaries, for people pleasers, and just indulging yourself sometimes, giving yourself a little treat, taking time off, doing things that you enjoy. Again, especially when we're in grief, that's important, but it's actually important all the time. We don't In our society, we talk about go, 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 and everybody, work yourself. And we need to focus more on taking care of ourselves. I view people as we are like a rechargeable battery. So if you have a rechargeable battery, it has to be charged. If you just keep draining it all the time and never charge it up, eventually it's not going to be any good to anybody. So we've got to take care of ourselves. So it's those four things. And then I find ways to do that on a daily basis, as I kind of said as I was going through those.
Right.
And I ask people, find the things that work for you. It doesn't have to be what I do, but the things that work for you. And if you start doing those on a daily basis, it'll really help you to keep yourself mentally fit.
Thank you for sharing that. Did you automatically know what were the things for you, or did you try something and then it didn't work out and tried something else?
Yeah, I just kind of came across these things by trial and error, and those are the things that actually work for me. I used to lift weights. I've done yoga. And I still do a little bit of yoga sometimes, but I started walking. I had a Fitbit, and it was like I wanted to get in 10,000 steps a day, and I was like, the only way I'm going to get that in is if I take a 6-mile walk in the morning, which actually is for my body and my mind because I listen to a podcast while I'm out doing that or listen to music, and I do it before I start my day. So it's just that's what works for me. So I tell people, like, when it comes to meditation, some people claim they can't meditate. And I'm like, everybody can practice mindfulness. We just need to find out what works for you. So try different things. It could be, using an app. It could be sitting quietly. It could be a walking meditation. You could do it while you're doing your walk. Just being mindful of your steps, something like that. So, yeah, for me, like I said, for me, it was trial and error. I offer those things as suggestions for people, but it might be powerlifting for you. So, no, that's fine too.
Thank you. You mentioned about the discovery call or the initial. If someone's apprehensive about reaching out to you and having that discovery call because they're afraid they're going to break down and be embarrassed, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's a really great point too. I have had people that will like apologize for crying, and I'm like, I see your tears as good. I see tears as you releasing emotions, and when we're in grief or all the time, it's important to express our emotions. And I tell people there are no bad emotions. There are emotions that we don't want to hold on to necessarily, but they're all here to teach us something and they all need to be expressed. So I've had people, on calls get angry. I've had people on calls, start crying. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm actually happy to see your tears because that means you're getting this out. That means that we're making some sort of a connection. So I hope that people aren't embarrassed by that. I don't think I don't see it as a bad thing at all. I certainly don't see it as a sign of weakness. I see it as a sign of love. A lot of times people are just very tired. They've been putting on a mask around their friends and their families and their coworkers and et cetera. And I tell people this is a safe space. This is a space where you can say anything, anything is fair game to say to me that you're angry at the person who left you, or you're angry at the doctor, or you're angry at yourself, or you're wondering if you're ever going to get back to normal or whatever. So all those things are fine. Another thing that people have sometimes, fear about discovery calls is they're basically sales calls. And they're thinking, okay, you're going to just try to get me on there and sell me. That is the last thing I want to do with people. In fact, I usually wait for people to ask me, like, if they want to work with me, like, how do I reach out to you? And if they don't, then I'll send them a follow up. But I've never tried to sell people on working with me. I want people that want to work with me, because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to help them. So that's never been an issue, at least for me. And it's funny because I worked with a business coach at one time. She's like, "You need to do this, and this," and I'm like, I'm not doing that." It's just this is really not about me trying to make a lot of money or bring in everybody. I'm not really looking to have clients, as I said, that don't really want to work with me.
Thank you. And earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned about grief being different things. Do you ever hear people trying to compare one grief to another or say this is worse than that? And if so, how do you manage those types of conversations?
Yeah, I think we all do that. I think it's a natural thing. And, I'll give you an example where I screwed up because I don't do everything right all the time. I was on a podcast, I was being interviewed. And of course, I've lost a daughter. And I said, the worst grief you can have is to lose a child. And this woman, she actually stopped me and she said, I've lost a child and I've lost a spouse. My husband just passed away. And I can tell you losing a child is definitely no worse than losing your spouse. And I was like, wow, okay. That's something I realized I should not have said. And we're all taught not to compare grief. But I think it's a natural human thing. My daughter passed away suddenly. Like I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. She went to bed and she didn't wake up the next day. And some people will say, well, it'd be better if I had time to say goodbye. But I've talked to people who've lost their children to, say, cancer, and they've watched them suffer and they've watched them not being able to talk and they, not be able to control their bowels and stuff like that. And so they've watched them slowly go through that process. And so, we'll say, there's good and bad either way, right? And so everybody's grief is different. It's interesting. I had one guy, he called me up for a discovery call, and the input thing, he had said that he had lost his best friend. So I talked to him for probably close to half an hour. We're getting toward the end of the call, and then he mentioned something about losing his cat. And I was like, oh, he's lost his best friend and his cat. Well, it turns out it was his cat that he was calling me about because people get really attached to their pets. And so I don't ever minimize anybody's loss, whether it's a cat or a dog, whether it's a miscarriage. I've talked to women who have had miscarriages and they feel just as sad as someone who lost a child that was 25 or 30 years old. So your grief is your grief, and that's the worst grief there is whatever grief you're going through.
Thank you. In the same concept of comparing, do you think men are women handle grief differently? And if so, what are some ways that you see that?
Yeah, again, I've thought about this a lot, and I think that, I don't think there are as many biological differences between men and women as people would have us believe that men are biologically, handle grief differently. But there's a very big difference in socialization. And so men in general are not encouraged to express their emotions. A lot of times men are not really in touch with our emotions. I always joke, you ask a man how he feels, a lot of men will say hungry, because they're not thinking emotions, they're thinking about biology. So that's a stereotype, but 85, 90% of my clients are women. And the few times I do get to talk to men, whether it's on a podcast or as a client or whatever, we're not encouraged to share. So I think we do typically handle things differently. Men a lot of times will we express anger better than we do other emotions. Men will sometimes like go into work, they'll become workaholics. So men we're not really taught very well. So yeah, I think there are general differences. There are also cultural differences. I don't get to work with a lot of African American people, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. But it doesn't seem like that, I think therapy or talking to people is not really encouraged. Sometimes people are held back by their religion because their religion will tell them you can't, communicate with spirits or talk to mediums or your death experiences are of the devil, et cetera. So sometimes that'll hold people back and they'll just say, well, I just need to go to church or I just need to read the Bible or talk to my pastor. So there are differences in the way that we handle things both culturally and I think by gender.
And from reading your bio, you have taken a well-informed aspect in different faiths after your daughter passed in trying to come to a sense of what's taking place. Can you share about some of that?
Yeah, well, I was raised as a Pentecostal. My grandfather was a pastor of our church. I was raised in a very fundamentalist kind of household, and it's a long story, but this idea of heaven and hell and God sending people to eternal torment just never sat right with me.
Okay.
So before my daughter passed, long before she passed, I had an intense fear of death. And I used to think I was a weird kid. I'm still a weird person. But when I was a kid, they would say, oh, well, Jesus is the only way to heaven. And I'm like, but what if I were born in India? I'd be a Hindu. And if I were a Hindu, then I would be going to hell. And I'm like, then I start realizing there are like a billion Hindus in India, So that just didn't make sense to me. So I started digging into I wanted to study Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and Judaism and a little bit of Islam. And so I studied all these different, faiths to see like where they were right and where they were wrong. And it's interesting to me that I think about 90% of what most of them teach are overlap. But we fight over the things that are different, and we say because of the things that are different, you're going to hell. So I was raised to believe that Catholics weren't saved because they didn't say the prayer the right way and they weren't baptized the right way. And then when I grew up, I found that Catholics believed that all Protestants were going to hell because we didn't take, the communion. So I'm like, what is the core truth? And I read a lot of C.S. Lewis, and it was interesting because even though he was a devout Christian, he talked about this concept he called the Tao or the Tao, which is this universal truth that precedes all the religions. So what religions do are they're all pointing to the same truth, but they're just coming at it a little bit different way.
Okay. Thank you. The topic, or I should say the name of the series that you are my first guest on, Voices of Widowhood Healing Through the Holidays.
Mhm.
Do you think the holidays makes grief any different or it's the same same?
It does make grief different, and the thing is that I think there are a couple reasons. No, one, I think, like, I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, like Christmas, for example, the holidays, they come around the darkest time of the year. And there's actually a reason for that. I think because, early on, people were like, it's really dark. We need something to lighten things up. We need to look forward to the light. So the winter solstice is one of the darkest times of the year, and that's right around when we have Christmas. So I think there's a biological thing going on there because it's just kind of a funky time of year. We were talking about the cold earlier. I live where it's cold. So it's cold and it's dark. But there's also this expectation we have of holidays. It's a time when everybody's supposed to be happy, where families are getting together. So we tell ourselves a story like everybody else is happy. Everybody else is with family. Everybody else is celebrating. And I'm miserable. So it makes us even more miserable during that time. It's a time where, normally we would have been with our spouse or we would have been with our child. It's a time where, again, where families are gathering. So, yeah, I think we miss them even more during that time. And that's why I think we need to be even more intentional about how we handle our grief during that time. We need to have a plan for how we're going to handle our grief. We need to have, set proper expectations for what things are going to be like. I used to suffer from sad seasonal affective disorder. And I thought, because I like the light, I like the summers and stuff. And finally, I realized after many years, it's like, if I could just set my expectations right, that I'm gonna have lower energy in the winter, I'm probably gonna sleep in a little bit later, I'm not gonna get as much done, then the sad kinda went away. I bought a sad light and I gave it to a friend 'cause, like, I don't need this anymore. I just decided this is the way things are this time of year. We have seasons outside, we also have seasons internally.
Thank you. What are some other practical ways that one can manage their grief during the holiday season?
As I said, I think one of the biggest ones is setting proper expectations, understanding that this is going to be difficult, having a plan, maybe setting some new traditions. If you've lost a loved one, you might want to set a place at the table for them during that time. Some people like to do that. Have their favorite foods. Do something that they would love to do. And I'm saying we do this for my daughter's birthday and for her angel date. So those are some of the things that we do. When my girls started getting older, my wife and I went from the two of us, where Christmas was kind of like not the way it was when you were a kid. It's not as exciting. To then it was like really exciting when we had little kids and I can get up and put their toys together for them and stuff. And then when they got to be teenagers, they were sleeping in and and they weren't getting toys. So I had nothing to play with. It kind of got boring again. So, like Christmas is just different. It's different seasons of your life. So when the girls were actually older, we started going to a movie on Christmas afternoon because they're like, again, no toys to play with or anything. So we're like, let's go to a movie. So we do that sometimes on Christmas Day. And so maybe, switch it up a little bit, say just accept that things change, and I talk to people, say, even if you haven't lost a child, for example, your child hasn't, they're not passed away, they might move. You might not see them during the holidays, things are going to change and we have to be willing to change with them. And the holidays can be, it might be a time now instead of excitement, it might be a time where you relax, where you just say it's not going to be that, wild, children running around and screaming and stuff until maybe you have grandchildren. Some people get that, but because my parents started, it's funny because my brothers and I are so far apart. Our children are. My parents would go like with us when because we had the first children, then they go the other brother, my other brother. Now that he has young children, so my parents kind of shifted their where their focus is.
Thank you. So most of our conversation has kind of been speaking to people who are grieving. I want to
Hmm.
shift it to people who are supporting people who are grieving.
Hmm.
How can they hold a safe space for them and not minimize their pain?
Yeah, that's a really important topic. The thing is, because I do the spiritual work that I do, sometimes people would tend to bypass what we call spiritual bypassing, which is like everything's okay, everything's going to be okay. I believe that God's in charge, or I believe in soul planning, so I plan this. Therefore, I shouldn't be sad about it, and that's just not true. Part of the human journey is going through all of these emotions, experiencing all these emotions. So we never want to try to take anything away from someone. We never want to say, okay, well, you shouldn't be sad because whatever, or at least, you had this time with them, or any of those things we want to say because we want to take it away from somebody. Now, again, we're going to say those things. We're going to try to encourage them sometimes, but be very gentle with that and allow people to go through their process. You know, um, in the guilt I talked about earlier, I have a friend that just went through this very recently and started saying a lot of things about how guilty they were feeling. And I realized I can argue with them all I want. I can give them, information. I can give them data as to why they shouldn't feel that way, but you're going to feel that way for a while. So in that early aspect of grief, I tell people it's what I call the white knuckle phase. You're just trying to hang on. If you're getting out of bed, if you're getting dressed, if you're taking a shower, if you're eating, you're doing the work. I was talking to someone earlier today and said that they lost a son to suicide like a little bit less than a year ago. And they said, well, I know I need to do something, but I don't know what it is. I said, you're doing it. You're surviving. A year out after losing a child to suicide, if you're upright, you're doing great. So helping people set that expectation that this is gonna take a while. It's a gentle process. So for people that are supporting people in the grief, people in the grief wanna be witnessed, they wanna be listened to. They don't people are always looking for the right words. Don't even worry about the right words. Just say, "I'm here for you. I'm here to listen to what you have to say. I understand," stuff like that. That's what people in grief wanna hear. We a lot of times we wanna talk about our loved one. People sometimes will avoid, "Oh, I don't wanna mention their spouse, I don't wanna mention their child because I'll make them sad." No, you're not gonna make them you're not gonna make us sad, we're already thinking about it. So, just being free with, letting people express themselves, and sometimes it's just sitting and listening.
Thank you. I believe on your website, you have a list of what not to say, what to say, or you have some different sections about that, giving people some guidance on that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's on my website, it's definitely in my book, but yeah, there are a few things that, a couple things are just kinda universal, like, don't say God needed another angel or, they're in a better place, stuff like that doesn't really help, and it kinda minimizes their grief, right? God needed another angel. Oh, God needed this person more than I did. This is my spouse I plan to spend the rest of my life with. You telling me that God needed them, right now? We might think that's helpful, but it's really not. And it can really kind of really, cut people. You're young, you'll find somebody else. Like someone can be replaced, whether it's a child, you can have another child, for example. We don't replace people. That person that was in your life, whether it's a child, a spouse, whatever, there is a unique fit they have in your life that no one else is ever going to have. So even if you do decide that you and I've been talking again recently, people who have gone through, like spouse loss, for example, and they're like, I'm with someone else, but it's not the same as the other person. And I don't want them to be the same, by the way. They're different, and that's fine. So don't try to minimize someone's loss by saying you can find somebody else.
Thank you. Another thing that I hear people often, and I want to hear what you have to say about, well, it's been 2 years, but I feel like I'm the same. I thought that after a certain amount of time would pass, this would just be better.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things. One is it takes time, and my experience now, I consider, and there's no stages of grief. There's no time for grief, but 2 years I still would consider to be early grief. And people may not want to hear that because they think I should be over it. But no, 2 years is still pretty early. Second thing is people are making more progress than they realize. So people that I talk to are so hard on themselves. They're like, I should be here or I should be there. I know you're former military and I'm working with a guy right now that's military and, project planner and like, okay, give me the steps. I'm going to do the steps. Here are the 5 books I'm reading like right now. And I'm like, okay, that's great that you're doing the work. But it's like if you're growing a plant, you can't just keep dumping water and fertilizer on it and think it's gonna grow in 2 weeks because I gave it enough water for a year. It doesn't work that way. So we have to be patient and understand this is a growth process. It's a birthing process. It's a plant. It's a or a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. All these analogies, you think things don't change overnight. The other thing about grief is I look at it as it's like a spiral. So it feels like you're going in a circle, but every time you come back to that place, you're actually coming at it, I think, from a different level, just a little bit higher, a little bit different perspective. So it sometimes will feel like we're circling around. And have people say, "Wait, I thought I was doing so much better," but then their birthday came around again, and I'm right back where I was. And I'm like, "No, you're probably not right back where you were. You do know now you've had some moments of joy. When you were first in this place, you didn't even know joy was possible. So you are in a place where it's a little bit different." I was talking with a client just really recently, and she was saying that she went to an event and she found herself dancing and laughing, and then she caught herself like, "Oh, I'm not supposed to be doing this because my husband's I'm supposed to be sad." And so then she went back to that sad place, but she had that glimpse. She had that glimpse of knowing that was possible and that will come back again. So you're in a different place.
Mm. The idea that I should not be happy. Where does that come from, do you think?
It's funny. I just published an article about that today because I was there. And when my daughter passed away, I thought, okay, one of the ways I can honor her is by just being miserable for the rest of my life. And I'm going to take a vow, an internal vow, that I am never going to be happy again. And people will say that he was never the same. And I think a lot of people think, well, if they're not here to enjoy it, then I shouldn't enjoy it either. That survivor's guilt, that idea that, if I really love them, I could never be happy again. It comes from, I don't know, I guess it's guilt. I guess is the best way to put it, and a really warped sense of what it means to honor someone. And there's also this subconscious fear that the pain we equate the pain with the love for that person, and we think I can't let go of the pain because I'll be letting go of the love, or if I
Mm.
let go of the pain, I'm going to forget them. And so we have to learn to separate those 2 things. We can let go of the pain. We don't have to live with that intense level of pain in order to keep the love that we have with that person. So that's I think where it comes from. And I work with people on a basis called continuing bonds. In the early days of grief, therapy or grief treatment, whatever, they would say basically get over it. The person's gone, accept it. Your attachment to them is unhealthy. It's like an addiction or obsession. So, let it go and accept reality and move on. And now we say you can and should keep that relationship with that person. It's okay to still love them. It's okay to still talk to them. It's okay to still include them as part of your life. That's all okay. And I think that's really helping people to be able to move forward. When I was in early grief, I remember people talked about moving on, and I'm like, I didn't like the idea of moving on because it sounded like I was leaving my daughter like in the past. I like the idea of moving forward with our loved one, and for me, moving forward to when I'm going to see her again. So I can move forward. I don't want to move on though.
When I hear that, it is very hard. It's interesting how some of those words have such deep meaning now that before we had this profound loss, it never would have had hit us
Yeah.
the way that it does now when you hear that. You spoke briefly about your book. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I actually have 2 books. One is Grief to Growth, and it's subtitled Planted Not Buried. That's the book I wrote early on, 5 years probably after Shayna passed, and it's about my grief experience, what to expect when you're going through grief, what grief is, some of the things to say, some of the things not to say, and a few things that, you can do to navigate grief and help others navigate their grief. And then my second book is Gems. So the gems we talked about, I wrote a short like PDF that you can download for free, but then I also wrote a book that outlines what the steps are, why it is that they work, give you some ideas as to how you can, modify it for yourself, to help people to again to have a practice to have to because people keep saying, well, what should I do? And I'm like, well, there are kind of 4 steps. They're kind of general, but these are some things that you should be doing anyway. But basically, frankly, whether you're in grief or not, you should be doing these things on a daily basis. So those are the 2 books.
Thank you. You also mentioned earlier about some people have psychotherapists and work with you.
Mhm.
For the person think, "Why would I need both? Why would I just need the psychotherapist? What are you going to do that my therapist would not?"
Okay, so there's a difference between a grief coach or a life coach and a therapist. And if you have a mental health disease diagnosis, psychosis, neuroses, you should be seeing a mental health professional. Grief is not a disorder. It's not a disease. It's not something to be cured. It's something that we have to navigate. It's something that we can actually use to transform us. The other thing difference is, and my daughter is a mental health professional. She's a licensed therapist, and they're taught, like for example, not to self-disclose, so they won't talk about what's going on in their lives personally. They're taught not to give advice. So it can tend to be, and I want to put down the mental health profession, but those are some of the limitations that they have that I don't have. So I will work with people and say, yeah, we might want to think about doing this way, or you might want to, to do this. I will. Another thing that people really like about talking to me is because they know that I know what they're feeling, that I've been through what they're going through, and people like to hear that. They want to have the grief witnessed. It's really interesting right now. We've got AI coming up, and people are saying, well, you can go to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT could be just like a therapist. And it can really mimic what people do, but what it doesn't do is feel. And what it doesn't do is look you in the eye and say, I've had that experience that you've had. People, I think, want that human connection. So, typically when people come to me, I said that are seeing therapists, it's because they've been seeing a therapist and they haven't had their grief witnessed the way that I can do it. Now, when I took my grief certification program, it was interesting. There were a lot of nurses and doctors and therapists actually in there because they don't get taught that when they're going through their program.
Mm. The picture behind you, is this your daughter, Shayna?
Yeah, that's Shayna. Yeah.
Thank you. How old was she in this picture?
That was like 6 weeks before she passed.
Wow.
And it was really wild because, Shayna was like her own person, of course. So she wanted to get her hair cut, and Shayna, had this long, beautiful hair, and African Americans, our hair typically doesn't grow really fast, and for women to get, long hair is sometimes, a little bit of a struggle. But Shayna was like 15 and her hair had never really been cut. So she told her mother, she said, I wanna get my hair cut. So she and her mother agreed on this hairstyle. And Shanna goes to get her hair cut, pulls out this other picture, which was that, and says, "This is what I want." And she came home, that's what she had. So, this was like 6 weeks before she passed. So that's I only have a few pictures with the hair like that.
Oh, wow. She is beautiful. When people have the same loss for a person in the household, what are some ways that probably more learned experience how to deal with that? Because as you said, we each have a relationship different with that person.
Yeah.
And when you're in the same house, that seems to complicate the grief a little bit than when people live in different places.
Yeah, well, in the same house, the thing is everybody it's interesting, everybody has a different relationship with every person around them. So I see Shayna one way, her mother sees her another way, her sister sees her another way, her grandmother sees her another way, her friends at school see her another way. So everybody has lost the same person, but they've lost a different person because it's like a fractal of a diamond. It's like we see that one part of them. So in my case, my Kayla was out of the house when Shayna passed because Kayla was in her first just finished her first year of college. But my wife and I, are here and we had different views on death. We had different views on, what this meant and stuff like that. But I was very fortunate in that we came together and kind of she started reading the same things that I was reading and listening to the same podcasts I listened to. So it really actually brought us closer together, to be frank. Kayla, at the time when Shayna passed, she had told me she was an atheist, a materialist, a couple of years earlier, and she was only 15 or so when she said it. She was 18 when Shayna passed. So I was really concerned about like, how's she gonna handle this if she thinks that just Shayna's just like gone. And she doesn't like to me share a lot about what her thing is, but she's really changed since that time. She went to the Helping Parents Heal conference with us a couple of years ago and volunteered there. So the thing is, we all have to honor the fact that people grieve differently. Some people are not gonna want to mention the person who passed. It doesn't mean they don't love them. It means for right then, it hurts too much. Some people wanna put the pictures away. I was working with a woman who's like her husband and her I think her husband and her other son didn't like to mention their son who had passed. They wanted to put all the pictures away. But she wanted the opposite. I said, "Well, we're gonna have to find a way to work together. So maybe we can say, like, on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, we'll meet and we'll pull out the pictures and we'll talk about them, so she could have her needs met, but they could also have their needs met. With Shayna, like, we had her body cremated and we were thinking about getting an urn or, piece of art, something there, and Kayla goes, "No, that's creepy. I don't want that in the house." So we're like, "Okay, fine. We won't put that in the house." So that was a compromise that we made with Kayla.
Mm. There is a lot of honoring other people's feelings in this process. to find that medium.
Yeah, so again, as grievers, and again, understand that people that grieve differently. Now, we talked about men and women earlier. I cried every day for a couple of years probably, but mostly it was in the shower, and mostly it was when other people weren't around. So somebody might looked at me and said, "Well, he doesn't seem to be as upset as, it's trying to," or my wife might have thought, "Well, he's not very upset because, I don't cry much in front of other people." But it doesn't mean that we don't care. So when you're looking at your spouse and they're like, I don't want to say their name, it doesn't mean that they don't love them. It means that it hurts them too much to say their name. So we have to just, again, honor that and find a way that we can navigate that together.
I would agree. Brian, thank you so much for having this conversation and being part of this journey to help people during the holidays. I have asked you a lot of questions. I try to give my guests an opportunity to see if they have any questions of me. You being a podcast, that may be a little bit too easy, but I will ask if you have any questions of me.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about asking you a question. So I guess for you, grief, obviously we think of all the sadness and all the anger and the guilt and all the other emotions. If anything, what has surprised you in terms of your grief that came out of it that you weren't expecting?
That I could not military project manage my way out of this quickly.
Mm, mhm,
Because, in fact, I wrote a note some time ago and I found it telling myself, I thought I could get over this quicker. And I realized there's never going to be, I got over this.
mm,
I was with my husband for 32 years
mm,
and I love him still today. And realizing, as you said, people feel like when they have an emotional moment, they're back to where they were. I know I'm not back to where I was. I just know that it still impacts me.
mhm,
On my husband's death anniversary and his birthday, hot mess. And I've just learned that I'm gonna take off work. I'm not gonna have anything on my plate. I'm going to let my emotions be what they are. This year for Mark's birthday, I live near the beach. I went to the beach and watched the sun come up. And
mm,
I did a live on one of my social media platforms and just shared with people memories of Mark and just had let it be. And that was okay. My son, who lives nearby, our son, we went and hung out, did some Jeep photo things, stuff like that with some murals. And I have remarried. And my current husband honors how I feel about my late husband. There's never a competition. But just realizing I will grieve Mark some form of fashion for the rest of my life. I wasn't prepared for that because this was
right,
the first close person to me to leave this world. My parents were still alive when my husband passed. And not that I was trying to wish them ill, but I was like, how? Like, that's
right,
not the order in your head that you think.
right,
And just our children will have moments in their life where their dad will not be here, and it's even more profound. So,
mhm,
it's the long game that
yeah,
I will grieve him forever. It doesn't look like it did that first year.
right,
It doesn't look like it did the second year. It does evolve, but I now no longer have this false expectation that I'm over this, that I've learned to just keep living and this will not impact.
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome, and I love what you said, the way you honor him, on those dates. I think that's really important to have that, those rituals and establish that, and love the fact that your husband now honors the fact that you still have love for your husband, 'cause it's amazing to me, and there are people that are like this. So people, you don't have to make a choice like, "Do I still love this person, and can I also move forward with someone else?" I've seen people navigate that really well, so, yeah, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you. I would like you to close out this conversation to the people that have joined us, and specifically knowing that this is the first conversation for my series and knowing this is for people during the holidays and encouragement
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, I would say be gentle with yourself. Set, reasonable expectations. Try to find a way, again, a ritual that works for you to honor your loved one, to bring them in, to make them part of your day, of your holidays or whatever, in whatever way that looks like for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune in to Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then, visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.